One of the most fun things to do with our Liquid Radiance colours is one colour colouring, where you're colouring a piece of fabric all over in one colour, then creating all sorts of different effects with it. Probably the thing that it would equate best to is tie-dyeing, but we like to think we've taken it a little bit further than that. To help you with quantities here, it takes about 6 to 8 teaspoons, not 68, 6 to 8 teaspoons of prepared colour to colour a 1/4 metre or a fat quarter of cotton. So I've just got a little piece I'm going to use. Here's my sample piece. So I'm probably looking at about 3 teaspoons to colour that little piece of fabric. I'm going to work with our prepared colours, and I'll just put a little puddle of that colour straight onto the board. Obviously, if you had a bigger piece of fabric to do, you could work in an ice cream container or a small bucket. But the major message here is that you don't need a lot of colour to colour a piece of fabric, and there's no real messing around with preparation. So with that colour on my board for my little bit of fabric, I'm simply going to mop it up, work it through, squeeze it out, and look, absolutely no mess at all to colour my piece of fabric. But yes, I'm sure you'll appreciate that that would need to be in an ice cream container or something if you were doing more than, say, 1/4 metre. I'm going to knead that colour through, working it through the fabric so that it's even, because that's the effect we're after here. However, if you wanted it uneven, there's no need to keep working at it. Yes, and there we've got that piece of fabric evenly coloured. For our next thought here, I'm going to squeeze the excess out, because we've talked about excess being the enemy and we don't want any enemy territory left in our fabric. Just put that aside for now. If I were producing a series of colours to go together in any given project, I could use what I squeeze out of my first piece as the base to add more colour to work on another piece of fabric that would go perfectly with that piece of fabric in any given project. So let's just add a bit of something darker, our green, to that. Mix it in. And take another piece of wet fabric, clean up my gloves, pick up the colour, and do the same process, working it through, kneading it through until that piece of fabric also is evenly coloured. And then using the next leftovers, I could add more colour to it and colour another piece, and then the leftovers from that to colour another piece. What we have to remember here though is as we work, each subsequent piece is diluting the colour even more. So we may need to add just a few drops of concentrate in the colours that we're working in. Look, the ones without the stocking, to whatever colour is relevant in our mixtures. With our fabrics all coloured up, we can now decide what we want them to look like. And just as an example, what's going to happen between wet and dry is amazing. Looking at our beach people over here, it's interesting to note that the dark sections of that fabric and the light sections of that fabric, they're stitched together as separate pieces of fabric originally. This one, the dark ones, were laid out flat, while the light ones were scrunched. It's exactly the same colour on exactly the same fabric. It's just how that fabric has been handled that's given it a totally different look. So let's have a look at some of the looks that we can create. The third piece of fabric that I coloured up was simply the green, to which I have now added blue. And if I left that dry, just laying out flat like that, the hills and valleys that are created in there will form the darks and lights that you saw on the dark band of the fabric. If I wanted to get the watery look, I need to scrunch that up quite tightly, and this isn't going to be accurate, it'll be quick. So just the bits peeping out at the top will be dark, while everything else enclosed will be light. But I'm going to let that one dry flat anyway. Let's have a look at what happens when we do the twist. Forward a little. I'm going to show you how to create a spiral. It's the way the big piece to my left has been created, and a couple of pieces on the front of my display. We need to decide where we want the centre of our spiral to be, and I'll go centre, but it doesn't have to be if you don't want it. I need to pinch up a little bit that I can keep between my fingers, and while I'm twisting with one hand, I'm combing with the other hand, forming the hills and valleys, the uppy downy bits that create our pattern. I don't want to get it too high because I'll enclose too much that will go light. Oops. So here we've ended up with a coffee scroll. On the blue piece, I wanted to have something cyclonic happen there, so I just left one of the corners a little bit open and scrunched it up a bit to get a totally different look. So you can see you're in control, let's just take that one back in, as to how your end piece ends up. If I want a nice crisp edging to that, I will lean on it and get the air exclusion thing happening. But if I want it to be smooth hills and valleys, I wouldn't lean on it. I would just leave it as it was originally. Let's have a look at some of the things going on. The hardest thing to accept with this is the fact that that's all one colour now, but during the drying processes it changes dramatically. So a piece that is all over one colour will break down into its darks and lights between wet and dry. My tree trunks started off as just a random concertina with a little bit of a scrunch on the bottom and open up like that when dry. The scrunches that were lent on to form crisp edges, not lent on to give the smooth edges. Popping things like coins or marbles or other things in, holding them in with rubber bands, can give you all sorts of amazing patterns. Folks, we could throw salt on it, we could do all sorts of things. All we've done is look at a really simple method of colouring up our fabric in one colour to create a whole range of different effects. So one colour colouring. It will work on any fabric or fibre whatsoever. I do like to work on my fabrics wet, especially if they're heavier weight, because it gives the ability to work that colour evenly and easily through the fibre. We're simply dipping the fabric into the colour, we're working it through. Make sure you squeeze out the excess though and mop it up on another piece of fabric, of course, so we don't waste it. Then it's a case of laying out the fabric to create the pattern in whatever scrunch or pleat or concertina you wish, remembering that what is exposed to the air is going to go darker and what is enclosed in the folds will go lighter. Your cotton fabrics that have a natural crease of their own will give you crisp effects, but fabrics with polyester or synthetic in them are going to have smoother effects. Let's have a look at some colours and scrunches and different pieces of fabrics, and consider doing a multiple of scrunches on the one piece.
It's such a simple technique, and you'll be amazed at the number of effects you can create using this method.